31st October 2008, a person named Satoshi Nakamoto published a post on a cryptography mailing list. It went like this: I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party. He termed it as Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The design paper of his proposed system was published at bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. Many people thought that this is a revolutionary idea and that the world needs such a system. Months later, Bitcoin went live on January 3, 2009. The first ever real-world Bitcoin transaction took place on May 22, 2010. On May 18, 2010, a person named Laszlo Hanyak started a thread on the Bitcoin Talk forum asking if anyone is interested to trade 2 large pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. 4 days later, on May 22nd, Laszlo Hanyak successfully bought 2 large pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. 11 years later, it's 2022, and 1 Bitcoin is now worth $48,900, which makes 10,000 Bitcoins worth almost $490 million. Imagine buying 2 pizzas for this price. They must be world's best pizzas ever made. So, how did Bitcoin become so popular and so valuable? Simple. People started realizing that Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology and it solves many problems that the traditional banking system fails to solve. And as more people and companies started investing in Bitcoin, it became really valuable. But what is Bitcoin and how does it work? Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer electronic payment system that eliminates the need for a trusted third party. You can directly send payments to others using Bitcoin without an intermediate bank. Suppose Alice wants to send some money to Bob. In the traditional banking system, Alice first initiates the payment to Bob, which then gets forwarded to Alice's bank. Alice's bank now forwards this payment to Bob's bank, and finally Bob receives the money from his bank. But there are many weaknesses in this current system. In this approach, both Alice and Bob are trusting their respective banks to send or receive money. The bank has total control over all of Alice's and Bob's transactions. The bank charges a transaction fee for every transaction it processes. The bank gets to decide whether a particular transaction should be processed or simply declined. Both Alice and Bob also need to have a bank account to send or receive payments, so it is impossible to make anonymous transactions or anonymous payments in the traditional banking system. Bank services can also experience downtime due to DDoS attacks or simply for maintenance purposes. So it is not guaranteed that you can send or receive payments anytime you want. This is bad because you are depending so much on a central authority and you are bound to trust this central authority. Bitcoin solves all of these mentioned problems and even more. In Bitcoin, there is no central authority. There is no server-client architecture because it is a decentralized application, also called as dApp. The whole concept of Bitcoin is to utilize the computing power of individual computers that are owned by normal users and thus not relying upon a central server or authority. The Bitcoin network mainly has 2 actors, users and miners. Users are the people who use Bitcoin to send or receive cryptocurrency. Miners are the people who are actually the backbone of Bitcoin. They are the ones who provide their computing power to support the Bitcoin network. Needless to say, without miners, Bitcoin simply wouldn't function. All the transactions in Bitcoin are public. They are stored in a public ledger called the blockchain. Blockchain, as the name suggests, is a chain of blocks. Each block contains more than 500 transactions on average. The size of a Bitcoin block cannot be more than 1 megabyte. The total size of the Bitcoin blockchain at the time of making this video is 335 gigabytes. Every miner has an individual copy of this blockchain. Whenever any Bitcoin transaction takes place, it is broadcast to all the miners in the Bitcoin network. The miners then use their computing power to validate this transaction and then include it in a block along with other transactions. When the block reaches 1 MB, it gets linked to the existing blockchain. But how is a Bitcoin transaction processed? In order to understand that, you need to first understand 2 concepts from cryptography. Let me briefly explain them to you. Concept 1. Digital signatures. A digital signature is used to verify the authenticity and integrity of a message. A mathematical function is used to generate a public-private key pair. As the name suggests, A private key is meant to be private and only the owner of it will have it. It is not shared with anyone else, just like your password. On the other hand, a public key is not meant to be private. It can be shared publicly with anyone. It is not sensitive information. Any message that is encrypted with the private key can only be decrypted by the corresponding public key. This can be utilized to our advantage to maintain the authenticity of a message. How? We'll see soon. Concept 2. Hashing. Hashing is just converting a given message into an irreversible fixed size output. The output of a hashing function cannot be converted to the original form because hashing is a one-way function. So once you hash any message using a hashing function, you cannot get back the message. All you're left with is the hashed version of the message. In Bitcoin, one such hashing algorithm called SHA-256 is used to convert messages of different sizes into fixed size outputs. It is also used for proof of work, which we'll talk about in a short time. When you say that someone gave you some Bitcoin, they are not physically giving you something, or they are not actually transferring something into your Bitcoin account. Actually, there is no account system in Bitcoin. Remember, Bitcoin doesn't work like the traditional banking system. All you have is a public-private key pair. So whoever is sending you Bitcoin is actually just transferring you the rights to use that Bitcoin. Actually, to be more precise, they are just announcing to the whole Bitcoin network that they are transferring you the rights to use a particular amount of Bitcoin that they previously owned. The cryptocurrency doesn't move between accounts or persons. It just sits there in the blockchain while people just exchange the usage rights for it. To understand this more clearly, let's consider a scenario. Suppose Alice wants to send Bob 1.2 Bitcoin. Alice first gets the Bitcoin address of Bob. A Bitcoin address is nothing but the hash of the public key. In this case, Bob's Bitcoin address is the hash of his public key. Alice now includes Bob's address and the amount of Bitcoin she wants to send in the transaction. Alice now broadcasts this transaction to the Bitcoin network, where a miner will verify it and add it into the blockchain. When the transaction is finally added to the blockchain, it is said to be successful. This means that Alice transferred the rights of her 1.2 Bitcoin to Bob. Bob can now use this 1.2 Bitcoin that Alice sent him because he is now the owner of it. But how can you be sure that someone else other than Bob, let's say Eve, cannot claim the rights to this Bitcoin that Alice sent? The solution to this problem is digital signatures. When Bob wants to use the Bitcoin that Alice sent him, he must do something to prove that he indeed has the right to use the received Bitcoin. To achieve this proof, Bob first hashes the whole transaction and then he creates a signature by signing this hash with his private key. And Bob publicly announces this signature along with his public key. As I already said, all Bitcoin transactions are public. They can be seen by anyone. This is to ensure that all transactions that occur in the Bitcoin network are transparent and authentic because anyone can verify these transactions, although it is actually the job of miners to do so. Anyway, for anyone to verify that Bob owns the rights to this 1.2 Bitcoin, all they need to do is hash the public key of Bob and check if it matches the address that is mentioned in the transaction. If they match, we are one step closer to the proof that Bob owns the rights to this 1.2 Bitcoin. The next step is to verify the signature that is also announced by Bob. Now we just take the public key that is announced by Bob and try to decrypt Bob's signature with it. As I already explained, only the corresponding public key can decrypt a message that is encrypted with its private key. So if the decryption is successful, it means that whoever owns this public-private key pair is the owner of this 1.2 Bitcoin. In this case, it's Bob. And if you think about it, the same applies to Alice as well. When Alice first sent Bitcoin to Bob, she must have also provided proof that she has the usage rights to whatever amount of Bitcoin she is sending. In this case, it's 1.2 Bitcoin. Alice provides this proof in the transaction itself, just like Bob when he is sending Bitcoin to someone else. Also, you can already notice here that if Bob or Alice somehow loses or compromises their private key, then they lose all the Bitcoin that their key is holding, because anyone can claim your Bitcoin if they know your private key. This is why you must save your private keys safely. And this is where cryptocurrency wallets come into play. They take care of your keys by storing them securely so that no one else can access them. For the final part of this video, let's talk about miners, the backbone of Bitcoin. As I already said, without miners, Bitcoin wouldn't function. But what do miners actually do? And how do they get rewarded for providing their computing resources to the Bitcoin network? The job of miners is to validate new Bitcoin transactions, add the transactions into a new block, and then link this new block to the blockchain. Each miner works individually to create a new block to add it to the blockchain. When a miner successfully adds a block to the blockchain, they get a block reward. The current block reward for Bitcoin is 6.25 Bitcoin. This means that if a miner successfully creates and adds a block to the blockchain, he or she gets 6.25 Bitcoin out of thin air, just like that. This is a way of introducing new Bitcoin into the ecosystem. For example, when Alice sent 1.2 Bitcoin to Bob, this transaction is broadcast to all the miners. Miners collect this transaction, verify if it is valid, and add it into the block that they are working on. They keep adding more and more transactions into this block until the block reaches its threshold size. Finally, the block must be added to the blockchain. But how do you decide which miner's block gets added to the blockchain? Miners actually compete with each other to add their respective blocks to the blockchain. In order to win in this competition, they are required to solve difficult math problems. The first one to solve it will get to add their block to the blockchain and hence win a block reward. The math problem that they need to solve goes like this. After a miner gathered enough number of transactions into a block, they need to find a number called the nonce such that when you add this number to the end of the block and apply the SHA-256 hashing function to it, it should produce an output that must start with a certain number of zeros. For simplicity, let's consider the number of zeros as 30. The probability that a miner finds such a number is 1 divided by 2 to the power 30, which is 1 in a billion. As I already said, a hashing function is irreversible, so there is no way for a miner to find out this number directly. He has to keep guessing it by incrementing the number, adding it to the end of the block, and then calculating the SHA-256 hash of it until he gets the appropriate output with the appropriate number of starting zeros. This is called proof of work. It helps to make sure that the miner who did the most amount of work will get to add the block to the blockchain and hence earn the reward. A new block is added to the blockchain by including the hash of the previous block in its header. In this way, blocks are linked with each other in order. Changing any block in the existing blockchain even slightly will also change its hash, and this breaks the chain. So once a block is added into the blockchain, it cannot be altered or modified. This means that there is no way for a Bitcoin transaction to be reversed. This also makes sure that no fraudulent parties will be able to modify the blocks in the blockchain, because even if they did modify a block in the blockchain, they will need to recompute all the other blocks from the modified block, which is a lot of work. But technically, it is not impossible. If an attacker controls at least 51% of the total mining power in the Bitcoin network, he could technically modify the blockchain as he wants. This is called the 51% attack. But it is very unlikely that such an attack could actually take place, considering that Bitcoin is such a huge network with hundreds of thousands of loyal nodes. We have seen how users can send Bitcoin to one another, and how these transactions or payments are processed by miners, completely eliminating the need for a trusted third party. This is how Bitcoin works. I hope I gave you a basic understanding of Bitcoin and how it works. But if all of this just went over your head, don't give up. When I was learning about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin for the first time, even I pulled my hair out, being a computer science student myself. So watch this video again if you must until you understand it. I will also leave links to some awesome resources in the description from where you can learn more about Bitcoin. These include the official Bitcoin white paper published by Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin Wiki, and some YouTube videos that helped me get a grip on the concepts of cryptocurrency. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you like it. And if you did like it, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up below. Also tell me in the comment section if you think Bitcoin will become more profitable and more valuable in the upcoming future. If you did not yet subscribe, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also turn on the bell icon to receive instant updates. Thanks for watching once again. I will see you in the next video. Until then, cheers.